The cold doesn't ask for permission. It creeps in, settles on your bones, and tests who's prepared and who's just hoping the wind has mercy. And back in World War II, soldiers, scouts and stranded civilians learned the hard way that sometimes fire simply wasn't an option. Flames gave away positions. Smoke betrayed movement. And in some places, fuel was scarcer than silence. Yet people still stayed warm. They still endured. They still survived. So today, on Legacy of Survival, we're pulling back the curtain on 5 fire-free heating tactics that kept people alive when the world was collapsing into chaos. These aren't fantasy tricks. They're real, they're smart, and they still work. If you've ever wondered how to build warmth when the world gives you nothing but cold ground and colder odds, stay close. This is where old knowledge becomes modern power. In World War II, warmth often began with the simplest, most stubbornly effective source, the human body itself. When soldiers moved through captured cities or were forced into hidden positions for days at a time, fire wasn't just dangerous, it was forbidden. Yet they managed to keep functional using what they called heat stacking. The idea was brutally simple. Trap your own heat before the cold steals it. Layers on layers, but done intentionally. The trick wasn't just piling clothing, it was creating micro-pockets of warm air. A thin, dry layer against the skin. A thicker, insulating layer over it. A wind-stopping layer on the outside. Even with limited gear, this approach created a personal heat chamber. People also used shared body heat far more strategically than movies ever portray. Soldiers sat back to back to reduce surface heat loss. Civilians in shelters clustered in tight, silent circles, rotating positions so no one stayed exposed too long. Nothing glamorous, just life refusing to quit. Modern survivalists talk about similar techniques now, but back then it wasn't a tactic. It was survival, stitched into instinct. When you tell most people to avoid sleeping on the ground, they nod politely, but don't grasp the danger. The earth steals heat 30 times faster than air. During World War II, hiding underground was often necessary, but staying warm was its own battle. So soldiers and civilians refined a forgotten trick, turning the earth into a heat trap instead of a heat thief. The method involved using thick layers of organic material, leaves, straw, pine boughs, even dry cloth, to create a thermal barrier. Not on top of themselves, but beneath them. In some hideouts, they stacked improvised flooring several inches thick. It created an insulating cradle that cut heat loss dramatically. And inside dugouts or foxholes, they shaped narrow spaces instead of wide rooms, because smaller spaces naturally trap more warmth. Some even built earth pockets, small hollow recesses at shoulder height designed to warm from recycled body heat. After a few hours, those pockets radiated heat back into the space like silent little ovens. No fire, no smoke, no giveaway, just clever engineering under pressure. When fire was forbidden, heat storage became a quiet art. Stones became heaters, but without flames ever touching them. During long marches or covert missions, not everyone could risk striking a match. So instead, they learned to use sunlight as their heat source. The trick was to stack dark rocks or bricks during the day in places with direct sun exposure, against a wall, inside a crater, on rooftops, really anywhere light touched consistently. Dark stones absorb heat far faster than pale ones, and once heated, they release that warmth slowly through the night. At sunset, people brought these stones into enclosed spaces, shelters, dugouts, abandoned buildings, even canvas-covered trenches. One soldier described how 2 heated stones wrapped in cloth felt like holding on to the afternoon. It wasn't enough to make a room toasty, but it prevented hypothermia and kept hands functional in freezing zones. Today, this method still works with surprising power, especially when combined with tight spaces and layered insulation. You know, one of the most overlooked survival tricks in World War II came from people who didn't have fires, but well understood airflow like a second language. Warmth isn't just about adding heat, it's about trapping it. And that meant controlling air movement, like a puppeteer working invisible strings. Shelters used during bombings or occupation often had no heating at all. Yet people stayed warm by sealing drafts with anything available. Rolled cloth, stacked furniture, sandbags, even pages from books pressed into window cracks. They weren't trying to heat the room. They were trying not to lose what little heat they already had. But here's where the forgotten magic lives: microventing. A room sealed too tightly becomes damp and cold. So survivors learned to create tiny, controlled airflow exit points, small vents high on the wall or tiny cracks away from the sleeping area. This allowed moisture to escape, kept oxygen circulating, and prevented cold condensation from killing stored warmth. It created a low-tech thermal balance that could lift a room's temperature several degrees without any flame at all. You know, modern campers rediscover this technique by accident, but back then it was intentional, masterful, life-saving. This method thrived everywhere, from frozen forests to bomb-scarred basements. People use movement not just to stay active, but to generate and trap heat through controlled compression. It wasn't chaotic exercise. It was short, precise bursts meant to warm the core without draining energy. Soldiers performed what they called heat pulses. That meant slow squats, tight core twists, small arm compressions, and rhythmic leg pumps, all to push warm blood outward from the torso. Then, right away, they'd wrap themselves up tighter, trapping that fresh heat before it had a chance to escape. In shelters, civilians had their own version, just a quick boost to circulation, then stillness under blankets or layered coats. Some even turned to compression bandaging, not with medical wraps, but using cloth tightened around key areas like the thighs, upper arms and waist. This helped increase heat concentration near the major blood vessels. Not too tight, of course, just enough to slow down heat loss. It's actually a forgotten technique that still works, especially when you need warmth without any movement or noise. And, you know, when you combine that with insulation, airflow control, or even earth layering, it really becomes a powerful trifecta for keeping heat in. Fire feels like the obvious answer to cold. But, well, history reminds us that flames aren't always possible. Sometimes the only warmth you get is the warmth you outsmart the world to keep. These 5 fire-free techniques kept countless people alive through one of humanity's darkest chapters. And the crazy part? They still work. They still matter. They still give you an edge when conditions turn unfriendly. If you found this breakdown useful, informative, or worth passing on, make sure you subscribe to Legacy of Survival. Share this video with someone who loves history or loves staying prepared. It helps the channel grow, and it keeps this kind of life-saving knowledge alive.